What I am seeing is a lot of these smaller communities within Greenland, a lot of these small communities are dying out.
That's the comment of seasoned Arctic adventurer and explorer Lonnie Dupre, who was the first person to circumnavigate Greenland by dog sled and kayak between 1997 and 2001. He has lived amongst Greenland's northern Inuit people and sees firsthand how climate change is impacting their way of life. We were lucky enough to meet Lonnie in Nuuk, Greenland, and asked him about the changes he has seen over his 25 years working in the Arctic. Hi, Lonnie. How lovely to have you with us. And we met Lonnie sailing in Greenland when we were transiting the Northwest Passage in 2025. And it's lovely to have you here as a guest for our podcast. Thank you.
Hi, Veronica. It's been a while since we've seen each other. It was we all met in Greenland, which was lovely. It's was so fun to enjoy our time in Greenland with you guys.
Yeah, it was lovely. I remember we had a really good night on the boat, so that was always cool. So, Lonnie, just for the purposes of introducing yourself, can you please tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and a bit of a history about your relationship with the Arctic?
Well, I grew up in northern Minnesota. And of course, we're known for cold weather there. So I got annealed as a young boy into the cold weather early. And then, as a young boy, I always thought Minnesota was as far north as you go because I wasn't really educated about that at the moment. Then I realized, oh boy, north goes another like 2,500 miles north. And I wondered, wow, how do people live and survive up in the extreme parts of the Arctic? And so I went on to learn everything I could about the Inuit people. I wanted to go visit those folks. I wanted to be able to travel in the Arctic. And then I went on to read everything there was about polar explorers. And as a result, I began doing expeditions in 1989 in the Arctic, starting in Siberia, and then spent many years since then in the Canadian Arctic. Some by dog team, some pulling sleds to the North Pole. Actually, rounding Greenland by sea kayak and dog team between 1997 and 2001. And then after that, I went on to about 15 years of mountaineering expeditions.
Wow, I think you're being modest. I mean, your list of achievements is quite phenomenal. But in that time, what changes have you observed, particularly in relation to climate change?
My trip across the Northwest Passage by dog team, of course, I visited uh, 13, 14 Inuit villages there. And then, of course, our rounding of Greenland, um, spending much time in the villages there. My love has always been with those people and primarily running of sled dogs, using sled dogs as draft animals and hunting companions and stuff. So I've seen that transition, especially in Greenland, where it's getting warmer now in the south part of Greenland, where they can no longer run sled dogs. So used to be in the southernmost part of Greenland that had sled dogs was Sisimiut, and then as you go north, there was more and more dog teams. And at one point, just north of there, Ilulissat had 3 to 5 thousand sled dogs when I was going through there in the late '90s. And a lot of those dogs were used for work. They would go out on the sea ice, fish Greenland halibut, put the halibut on the dog sled, bring the halibut back into town for processing. But now there's virtually no sled dog activity in Sisimiut. And as you get further north into Disco Bay and Aasiut and Ilulissat, many of the dogs are no longer used for getting halibut because it's just not safe to be out on the sea ice anymore, and the time is very short. And then as you get even further north, like in the Umanak area, they're even running into very unstable sea ice patterns. So the flow edge that typically is open in the winter is now this flow edge between land fast ice and moving pack ice. an open sea, that flow edge is getting closer and closer to the villages and moving further into the fjords. Now, even this year, I been monitoring the sea ice up in Connacht, the northwest part of Greenland, and I'm finding out that the sea ice is not forming very far out from the coast of Connacht right now, and so it makes it very, very difficult for the hunters to get out of from the village and go hunt. It's just a fact of what's happening, and it's a combination of a very populated planet and the use of fossil fuels, right? So,
Mm.
I wonder how the Inuit communities in Greenland are coping with the reduction in ice generally.
what's happening is that they're having to resort to boating more. They used to be able to run around on the ice with relative safety, but during polar night, going out to sea is really difficult because it's hard to see floating pans of ice and stuff. You don't want to run in with a boat. So it just reduces Greenland's ability to move around. Because Inuit move around on sea ice, especially in like Canada and northern parts of Greenland. Sea ice is critical for moving around. Greenland has no network of roads between villages because you have ice cap in the middle of the island, and then it's ringed by a very steep terrain and mountains. So it's not practical to create roads between communities.
And what is the impact on the communities then, that
Well,
inability to move around?
Well, as you know, these communities are very isolated, right? And so this even makes them more isolated where they cannot travel from one village to the next by dog team to visit their relatives. So that creates a very isolated feeling living in a village, especially these villages where you can see from one end to the next, and you know every square inch of that community in the first 10 days you're there. And so when you can't get out hunting, you can't go visiting, it's like you're almost held hostage in your own community. And that creates domestic issues and all kinds of psychological problems that these communities have to endure.
And also issues of food security as well, I imagine?
Yeah, in terms of country food, as they call that, where you can go out on the ice or hunt or fish some of your own food becomes more difficult. And so they're relying more on food that's coming from Denmark. On a ship, they only get a ship twice a year. And so, and also a lot of the European food that gets transported there often isn't healthy as it could be for these people and creates health issues.
One of the things that I think people listening to this podcast will wonder is, why are we talking about Inuit people and not talking to Inuit people? And I think we need to kind of address that in this podcast. We found that Inuit people were very reserved, and in talking to you about what's happening there, essentially what we're trying to do is respect their need for privacy and also wanting to hear their story. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that sort of cultural thing so that in this podcast we can explain why we're talking to you.
They are really private people as well, and they also don't need scientists or people like us to tell them that climate change is happening. They know it is. They're out there living it, right? That's much like the people that farm here or people that fish on the west coast of Canada or what. You also don't they also know that there's changes. They can see it. They're outside every day. It's the people that don't see it as much. We don't feel it like people that live outside do. And so
Like people who
um
live on a boat, like when we're exposed to this stuff all the time, right?
you can see it, you can feel it. You're there. It's all tangible, right?
Thank you, Lonnie. Nigel?
Yeah, Lonnie, we've heard other things like changes in species distribution in that area, like maybe some species are no longer there or fewer. And second, we've heard um, about instability in some of the buildings built on permafrost and that sort of stuff. Are those things that you're aware of changing?
in the far northwest, the permafrost is melting out of the hillsides that they have their buildings built on. And as you know, anywhere in the Arctic, if you're building, is extremely expensive because it's got to come up on ships. You got a limited amount of time in the summer to build, and so it's a very expensive process to build anything in the Arctic. And then when you find out that what you built is built on permafrost that is melting due to climate change, it's really pretty catastrophic to these communities because they got a huge investment there that is now without foundation. So it's when you got big fuel tanks and schools and government buildings all built on permafrost that is now melting out from under it. You can imagine it's not good.
So, just following up how long the impacts of climate change have been felt, there was a quote, and I presume you've seen it in the Canadian High Arctic Research Centre in Cambridge Bay, that said that the Inuit have known about climate change before it was even labelled as such by the scientists. So, this is not a new thing. People have been adapting to climate change in the Arctic for quite some time. Um, can you tell me a little bit about what you've observed as in the ways that the Inuit in particular have adapted to climate change?
Well, fortunately, the Inuit people are very resourceful. They're able to improvise with almost nothing for tools. And so they will be able to adapt. Human beings will adapt as much as they can and as fast as they can. But it's not going to be without a lot of sacrifice. Uh, the um, um, the things that can't adapt are the animals that are already up in the Arctic and trying to figure out how to adapt. I mean, that's like the Perry caribou and muskox and polar bear. They can't adapt to the speed in which climate change is taking effect. They've got their instincts from hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. They just can't make that switch in the course of like two generations of people on the planet. It's too fast for them to adapt. Or there's animals and birds and stuff that are slowly moving north. But where do the north animals go? Somebody gets pushed out, and that's going to be the animals at the extremes, whether it's the penguins down in Antarctica or the polar bears up in the Arctic. What's happening is the polar bears are being moved off the ice and onto beaches, and the barren ground grizzlies are being pushed north from climate change. The polar bears are being pushed south, and now they're meeting in the tree line, which is the trees now are moving further north as well. And so they're also competing now for food as well. There was a very bad rain event in the high Arctic up on Ellesmere Island in the month of February, which was unheard of at that time, and it coated the tundra with a pretty thick layer of ice. And so the Perry caribou, which are only about 70 pounds, they're not very big. They couldn't paw through it to get food. So about two-thirds of the Perry caribou population perished from starvation because they couldn't eat. There was also several muskox herds that got reduced because of that as well. So when we think about all these difficulties that are going on with climate change and all everything, it really is going to take governmental regulation to put a put a put a safeguard around this. It's really going to take that.
I remember you mentioned another impact on the communities, which was about young people and the changes in composition with hunting disappearing and so on. Could you talk a little bit more about that and what's happening with communities in that respect?
The young people now, and this is after my time in Greenland, are all engaged in social media, right? They're seeing for the first time what is out there beyond their little community of 500 or what have you. And so, of course, this gets the wheels turning, and they're spending more time on phones and electronics and not out hunting. It's being it's a pull between two cultures. So they got the hunting gathering culture, and then they got the modern culture that really don't know a lot about, but they're really interested in, and so they're being torn in half in such a short amount of time.
So, Lonnie, just following up on that a little, what do you see as the future for the Inuit?
Well, I think about this saying, from an old Inuit shaman, when there's no longer ice or snow, will no longer be Inuit. That hit my heart, and it's like I mentioned earlier, I think they're going to be able to adapt to climate change. We have to adapt to climate change. They're the kind of culture that can improvise and can adapt, and they have those skills, right? There's a lot of us that don't, and so yeah. But what I am seeing is a lot of these smaller communities within Greenland, and probably not as much in Canada, but in Greenland for sure. A lot of these small communities are dying out because they're moving to larger communities. Like there was a community north of Disco Bay called Islorsuit. A lot of those people in that community moved to a larger community called Umanak or went to Ilulissat to live. So a lot of these smaller outposts, communities that are 100 people or less, they are moving into larger communities because they're seeing that travel's difficult in the winter, right?
And that's been affected by climate change.
Yeah, so I figure, well, if we can't travel to Ilulissat anymore by dog team, well, we'll just move there, right? And that kind of thing. And so it's happening a little bit up in the northwest as well, a part of Greenland. I'm seeing a couple of communities that are um, uh, going uh, extinct, so to speak, which is not the Inuit's nature. Inuit nature is nomadic, hunter gatherers. They're they perform they have better lives when they're a little more spread out because the resources are spread out, the animals, the berries, the fish, right? It's always been nomadic pockets and clans of people that would move with the patterns of the caribou migrations and bird, and when the fish come up to spawn and when the berries come out, and so that culture doesn't work when it's all under one roof.
It's a huge culture change in a very short period of time, isn't it? Top of only one or two generations ago, the changes imposed by governments, the Canadian, the American, the Danish governments. So you're asking a culture to change and change again and change again. Tell us a little bit about what's next for you. Just give us a précis of what you've got coming up.
Yeah, yeah. So last summer we brought a sailboat from the Nordhus from Grand Marais, Minnesota, which is in the center part of North America, basically, and ran it through a river lake system and got all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean, and then scooted across to Greenland. And that was a 3,400 mile journey. The boat is in West Greenland right now, and our project for next year or this coming summer is to take the boat from there and go along the west coast. We're gonna visit some folks that I met there years ago in some of these isolated communities like Kuslasawak and then Savasivic. We're gonna stop at there. And then we're going to wedge the boat as far north as we can possibly get the boat, touching on some of these little auk colonies along the way. And these little auk colonies are essential to a lot of the Inuit lifestyle up in Konak, where they net these little birds by hand, and they're a great food source for them. But we want to see if their population is stabilized or going up or coming down in some of these colonies. And then we're going to go north between Greenland and Ellesmere. We're going to place a couple depots for a future ski polk expedition. And then we're going to bring the boat all the way up to hopefully to Robert Peary's furthest north when he brought the Roosevelt there in 1908 to go to the North Pole. So that's our objective there. And then we're going to try to get out of there before our butts get pinched in the ice and bring the boat all the way back to Newfoundland, where we're gonna put it out, take it out of the water there.
That is a
Wow.
very full summer agenda, isn't it?
That was a very full summer. We got a good crew, though. I'm excited about that, so I'm confident we got the expertise behind it. And then, yeah, and then we'll see what happens from there. I don't know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Lonnie, and your insights into the Inuit and the Arctic itself. And we look forward to hopefully catching up with you while we're out sailing at some stage soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Veronica. Thank Nigel for a great time this morning.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lonnie. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, our enormous thanks to Lonnie for his time today. If you wish to learn more about the work Nigel and I are doing, then you can follow us on Instagram at Navara One Planet, on YouTube on Navara One Planet, or email us at navara.one.planet@gmail.com. Thank you so much from the Navara team.